So it is great to be here. I was reflecting back that I led meditation at this time last year, this kind of liminal period between Yom Kippur and the beginning of Sukkot on Wednesday night. And this year, I was really blessed yesterday, actually, to be charged with, I would say, supervising the building of a sukkah in my daughter's backyard. And so it was such a sweet time. My son-in-law began the building. My husband, Jeff, completed it. Um, and then my 3-year-old granddaughter, Nora, and I were charged with the decorating. So we got a good bit of decorating done yesterday. And at one point, my husband had affixed loosely, I'm using that word very loosely when it comes to the building of a sukkah, the roof, as it were, are kind of bamboo mats. And she looked up and she said, "Papa, where's the roof?" And we looked at her and we said, "Nora, that is the roof. This is Sukkot." Our temporary, fragile dwellings that we attempt to put up in a world in which we're reminded of fragility every single day through war, through weather, through climate change. And I thought her comment was, and her question was so, she really put her finger on what the essence is of this time of the year and this holiday, Zman Simchatenu, this holiday of joy that we experience through the essence of fragility. So as I was thinking about her question and her observation, I was drawn to the words of Rabbi Alan Liu, Zichronah Livracha, may his memory be a blessing, the author of a wonderful spiritual guide, a guide of a book called "This is Real and You Are Completely Unprepared." I know many IJS teachers have been teaching from this, a beautiful set of writings about the High Holy Days and, of course, extending into Sukkot. My beloved copy of this book got waterlogged at some point, and the pages are swollen, and I still go back to it each year. And I was drawn through my granddaughter's observation of the building of our sukkah to his sage wisdom about this holiday. So I want to ask Natalie to screen share the text that I want to ground us in today. And also want to thank my colleague, Rabbi Margie Jacobs, who lifted this text up to me this week and reminded me of his wisdom. So in the excerpt from this essay toward the end of his book, Rabbi Liu points out that we sit flush with the world, very close to the physical world, in a, quote, house that calls attention to the fact that it gives no shelter, which is, of course, exactly what my granddaughter observed. The sukkah isn't really a house. It's the interrupted idea of a house, a parody of a house, right? It's kind of ludicrous that we would expect there to be any real shelter or permanence to this dwelling. He goes on to say, the sukkah exposes the idea of a house as an illusion. The idea of a house is that it gives us security, shelter, haven from the storm. But no house can really offer this. No building of wood and stone can ever afford us protection from the disorder that is always lurking around us. No shell we put between us and the world can ever really keep us secure from it. Before I continue with other excerpts from Rabbi Liu's beautiful work here, I just want to point out that those of us with friends, colleagues in hurricane-stricken areas, this is particularly coming at an acute time as I reflect on my friend in Asheville who recently had to leave her home. She came through the hurricane safe, but still has no running water. And certainly those of us, again, with friends and colleagues in Florida, knowing what individuals and communities are dealing with during this time, we're hearing Rabbi Lou's words through that lens, right? Of knowing that the security, the shelter, and all of the amenities and utilities that we have come to take for granted, many of us in our homes, can't really afford us protection. And he goes on to say, in the Sukkah, a house that is open to the world. I was especially drawn to these words. I bolded them when I prepared this copy. In the Sukkah, a house that is open to the world, a house that freely acknowledges that it cannot be the basis of our security. We let go of this need. The illusion of protection falls away, and suddenly we are flush with our life, feeling our life, following our life, doing its dance one step after another. And when we speak of joy here, we are not speaking of fun. And here I'll just insert that Rabbi Lou's talking about Zman Simchatenu, right? That this is the festival that is known as the time of our rejoicing. But he reminds us we're not speaking about fun when we speak about that concept. Joy is a deep release of the soul, and it includes death and pain. Joy is any feeling fully felt, any experience we give our whole being to. We are conditioned to choose pleasure and reject pain. But the truth is, any moment of our life fully inhabited, any feeling fully felt, any immersion in the full depth of life can be the source of deep joy. And thank you, Natalie. You can take the text down, and anyone who wants to see that, it's Natalie put it in the chat for us. So I share these words of Rabbi Alan Lew today so that can be our backdrop for entering into our practice together, is that on this day, a day and a half before we enter into the festival of Sukkot, to prepare ourselves to encounter joy wherever we are. And really, as he so beautifully said, that even pain, even the grappling of death and destruction and the fleeting nature of life as we see all around us, this is still a time for us to reflect. How are we going to hold that coming into this festival tomorrow night? How are we going to make space in this moment, in these minutes that we have together, to prepare our bodies and to prepare our souls for experiencing joy in whatever way we can in this moment? So I invite you into your own container of your body and whatever you're encountering in that body today, in whatever position you find yourself with your body in this moment, feeling some kind of contact, feeling grounded, either through your tuchus, your tush, through your feet. Maybe it's your back if you're lying on the floor, or your side if you need to be in that position. And to connect with our breath, if that is something that's accessible to you. If the breath isn't an anchor for you today that you can access, maybe you want to pick something else in your physical space, contact with a part of your body, a visual kavanah, visual intent in the room that you can connect with. As we try to open ourselves up to what joy can feel like in this body that we inhabit at this moment, right on the cusp of coming into the festival of Sukkot. We'll sit in quiet for the next 12 minutes or so, and then I'll bring us back together with a wordless nigun, a bit of melody, before we turn to the mourner's Kaddish and conclude our time today. Ay, da, 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 da. Yay, da, 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 da. Yum, ba, da, 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 da. Yay, da, 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 da. Yum, ba, da, 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 da. Yum, ba, da, 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 da. Yay, da, 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 da. Yay, da, 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 da. Yum, ba, da, 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 da. Yum, ba, da, 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 da. Yum, ba, da, 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 da.
Thank you so much, Susan. And invite everybody to stick around if you can for some conversation and reflection and chance to ask questions. And if you need to leave us, we wish you tzidchem l'shalom, farewell, and hope you can join us again tomorrow or soon, same time, same channel. Right now, we have an opportunity for those who are remembering loved ones to recite the Mourner's Kaddish. If you want to, in the chat, include the name of anyone you are holding in heart and mind today as we say Kaddish together. You have an opportunity to do so. We have the text up as well, and you are welcome to unmute and join me in reciting the Mourner's Kaddish. יתגדל ויתקדש
יתקדש שמי
שמי
רבא,
בעלמא
בימיו
דברך
זכויותיה
ויומיך מלכותי בחייכם ובימיכם וחיי דכל בית ישראל
בהקלה
ברעה
ובזמן
ובזמן
קריב ויהיו אמן. יהי
אמן.
שמי
רבא
רבא מברך
רבא
לעמליה
מברך
יתברך
לעלמי
וישתבח
וישתבח
ויתרמן
ויתפאר
ויתעשה
ויתרומם
ויתפאר
ויתנשא
ויתעלה ויתעלל
ויתהדר ויתעלה
מקודשה
ויתהלל
בריחו
שמי
לעילה
קודשא
מכל
בריחו
ברכתה
לעילה
ושבתה
מכל
בריחו
ושבחתה
ברכתה
ונשמתה
ושבתה
תעמירם
ושבחתה
בימיו
ונחמתה
יאמרו אמן.
יאמירן
יהי
בך
שלמה רבא
יאמרו אמן.
משמיה בחיים
יהי
מלא
שלמה
גדולי
רבה
ישראל
מאיה
יהיו
בחיים
אמן.
מלא
עושה
ברוך
שלום
ישמח
במרמה
ותרועה.
ויעשה שלום
עושה
עלינו
שלום
ועל כל
במרומיו
ישראל
ויעשה שלום
ועל כל
עלינו
יושבי תבל
ועל כל ישראל
ויאמרו
ועל כל
אמן.
יושבי תבל ואמרו אמן.
אמן.
Imaru, Amen.
Thank you, everybody. So we'll bring Susan back up here. Here we go. Thank you. So Susan, thank you so much for sharing that teaching from Alan Liu. A reminder that his book not only covers the preparation to the high holidays, but extends through. And Mira, I already see, has a question. And just a note for everybody else, if you have a question in the chat, if you can follow that example and just put question in all caps, that's helpful for us to note that. And I think it's actually a lovely question to start with. Since the sukkah is fragile and temporary, what does it mean to pray as we do, as part of our liturgy, for God to spread a sukkah of peace, a sukkah shalom, over us? Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I wonder what comes to mind for you, Susan, when you hear that.
What comes to mind for me is moment by moment, right? That's all we have. So when I think about our request that God spread a sukkah of peace over us, maybe it's a series of moments, right? Of like moments of awareness in which we can be fully present or grasp what a blessing is. It's fleeting, right? A series of fleeting but beautiful moments. That's what comes to mind for me today.
Yeah, or that it constantly. I think there's so much playing with the notion of home that happens through Sukkot, and within that sort of permanence and impermanence, right? We have the teaching from the Talmud that, during the 7 days of Sukkot, we're supposed to make our sukkah our permanent dwelling place and our house our temporary dwelling, right? But we know that sukkah is supposed to be a temporary dwelling place, but we're sort of imagining it into being permanent. And I think within that, there's this invitation to kind of subvert, like upend, our ideas of, the idols that we create around what we think of as permanent, which we know, are not. Like, nothing is ultimately permanent other than, the chiyut, the life force of the eternal. I think that's a lot of what we're trying to get at through this holiday. And so peace itself. Yeah.
I was, in thinking about what to share today, I had noodled around a bit with the idea of the Hebrew expression makom kavua, a fixed place. And I thought this was very interesting to think about it post High Holy Days also, because many of us have spent a lot of time in synagogue. And the synagogue, that's often a phrase that's used in a synagogue, right? Like, what's your makom kavua? So when you walk into a synagogue, if it's a place that you've been to more than once or twice or three times, you have a place, like there's a place that you like to sit. And what that means when someone sits in your place, right? And the reminder of this holiday reminding us that there actually is nothing such as a makom kavua, right? Or the indignity, the indignation that some of us feel. Sometimes we're like, well, that's where I always sit, right? It's
Right.
like,
Right.
it's all upended.
And then we're dealing here with two names for God, right? We have God as Shalom and God as Hamakom, as the place. So both of these are um, uh, things that we might think of as steady states, and yet they're not really. They're even things that we know in physics, even things that we think of as steady state are not actually steady state. They're also constantly in motion. So yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah. And I'm curious to hear from others. It's such a good question, Mir, to lead us off. And I see that Harris has a response there. And if there are others in response to that as
Yeah, I'd
well.
love to lift up what Harris commented on in the chat when he says, feeling safe and secure only, I think, comes from relationships with others. And I was also reflecting on that this morning as I was thinking about this teaching, get a little bit different vein, but the times in my life where everything else has been fleeting, right? Physical places, all different things, and thinking really all I have left at the end of the day is the interactions that I've had with other human beings and relationships, or even if there aren't relationships that are still a part of my life now, those exchanges with other human beings are really the most, I don't know, for me, the biggest sense of permanence that I have these days. So thank you, Harris, for lifting that up.
Mm. Yeah, and then I also see Lori's response to that, and maybe not. Right? I'm thinking of the line in the Carole King song, you've got a friend, people will use you and abuse you, right? And so what does it mean to be a friend, to feel that sense of security in relationship, trust, right? Where does trust come from? Yeah.
Or even Lori, I would say that also for me, it's after, that's why I mentioned that maybe the relationships aren't a part of my life now, but looking back and thinking the positive interactions that I had with people or the sparks of light that we exchanged, that is enduring for me, even when maybe in our fallibility, the relationships didn't endure themselves, but those moments I feel like are still with me.
Yeah. And there's such a an invitation in the sukkah, and a sort of a requirement around this question of trust, right? Like when your granddaughter's asking about where's the roof, right? Or I remember I wrote about this last night at the beginning of that newsletter we sent out. But I remember when my youngest a few years ago, we were out in the sukkah, and the wind started blowing and the sukkah it was a strong wind and the wind and it got a little wobbly, and he said, I feel safe, but I also kind of don't feel safe. And I was like, you nailed it, right? That's exactly
Exactly.
it, right? Exactly. Um, so yeah, so many good things coming in here. I see another question. Um, two more questions. Uh, so there's a question, which is on a lot of our minds right now, is splits within the Jewish community and and questions of how we handle um, uh, the violence of the war. There's a question also about connecting, oh boy, a lot coming in, between joy, gratitude, anticipatory grief. I find joy in the moment when I feel gratitude for what I have right now. Um, and there's also experience of anticipatory grief and worrying about potential losses. Uh, so yeah. And then we have a very practical question from Deborah, which is why do people put bamboo mats on top? Which, Deborah, that's one form of schach because it satisfies the requirement. And as a user of bamboo mats, I can testify they're very easy to open, roll up, put away. No muss, no fuss. They last. So I like them. Yeah, I wonder about maybe we can go to the joy question first, and then we can come back to the question of shlemut maybe in the Jewish people, which is also a theme of Sukkot,
Right.
more the lulav than the Sukkot maybe. But
Yeah, I think Nancy's question about the connection between joy, gratitude, and anticipatory grief is also could be related to, I think, was it Lori's question that we started out with, like talking about why do we pray to God for this if it's so fragile and temporary? And I think, gosh, that's so related to what you're asking, Nancy, because if we can really embrace the idea that things are fleeting, then all we really have is this moment. And so are we going to spend the moment, and this is a huge tall order, so I'm posing this as much to myself as to anyone else. Are we going to spend that moment anticipating the loss that might come? Or are we going to immerse ourselves in the moment and what is right in front of us in terms of the gratitude or the what we do have? Those are huge questions. I think that's a spiritual practice in and of itself, right? Is how do we keep ourselves anchored in this moment? That's what we're practicing when we come together, as we've done this morning, this afternoon. I don't know, Josh, I see those as being very interrelated.
yeah, yeah, right. I mean, the whole question of anticipation is such an interesting question because we want to be grounded in the moment, but even, building the sukkah. Sukkot requires preparation. You can't build the sukkah on Sukkot, right? You have to prepare for it. You can't get your lulav on Sukkot. You need to have gotten it before. You can't prepare for, I mean, the Talmud says somebody who prepares for Shabbat has what to eat on Shabbat, and somebody who doesn't prepare, they don't have anything to eat on Shabbat. So preparation is important, but how we do preparation while also being present in the moment and not getting caught up too far, right, in what may or may not be. Like that's I think even just being mindful and aware of that tension is such an interesting one, right?
Well, I think I was joking about this with someone yesterday. I wonder if clergy are the only people who are thinking about Rosh Hashanah next year on this year at this time, or Yom Kippur. And I think that part of that is because for some of us, we're reflecting already on, oh, could we do this differently or do this better even next year? I don't know if people who are sitting out in the community praying think of it in that way, but and that's a moment of like reminding myself to pull back, like, yes, okay, you can think about what next year might be like on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, but pull back to this moment because you don't know
Mhm.
what next year could look like, where you're going to be, in what form you're going to be, etc. So,
I do want to just respond to the anticipatory joy question. I think definitely. I think that I think that is very much encouraged in a lot of ways. I think that the notion of, setting aside something for Shabbat, right? That Hillel said, in the Talmud says, or that every day you should set something aside for Shabbat, or that uh, that imagining when we imagine a wedding day, or we imagine, um, uh, we oftentimes will imagine our way into some future event, and the
Well,
joy that
and there's science to back that up, I think,
right?
that the anticipation of a joyous event is actually as joyous or enjoyable as the event itself. So
And even the way we close Yom Kippur, the Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim Habnuyah, like with this anticipation of something that's going to come, next year. So yeah, to that point, Susan, actually everybody finishes the high holidays thinking about next year.
that's true. Touche.
Okay. To the question, I don't want to ignore the question of the war and how to hold all of that, and within the unity of the Jewish people, and further. And yeah, I think a lot of us have been thinking about that, not only with Sukkot, but just more broadly speaking. So just give you a chance, Susan, if there's anything you want to share there.
Sure, this is a huge question, Dee, so thank you for giving voice to it. I'm just hearkening back to a sermon that I gave at Kol Nidre on Erev Yom Kippur on Friday night that talked about a microcosm of this. Is basically, how do we do teshuva? How do we re-engage and repair with people who aren't like us? And so I think, as you know, especially your last question, what does it mean to be Jewish if so many who claim to me do not seem to be living by the core principles of humanitarian elements of this religion? By the way, that could also be expanded out to our universal community, right? Our neighbors, people we work with, right? And this is one of the major, major issues, I think, facing the world and facing us in this country, is that how do we remain in conversation with each other when we hold such different values? So I won't say more. That's the topic of that sermon. So Dee, what you're saying really resonates with me. And I think one of my first things is to say, how can I stay in conversation with this person and not bolt from the room?
Yeah.
Really extremely difficult.
And maybe that also gets to one other concept of shalom here, right? That we have the notion of shalom bayit, and how do we maintain a home? The sukkah is ultimately about a concept of expansiveness, and I think porousness and welcome, invitation around home, and and that really is that's our challenge and our invitation, I think, this year and every year. But I think we 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 shouldn't ignore the relationship between the notion of home and the notion of peace, right? Which come together in the idea of shalom bayit. It's not exactly a practical answer, but it's a big topic.
Well,
So
it actually ties back, Josh, to the one line that just spoke to me so much out of what Rabbi Lou was teaching today through the text I brought. I pulled out a house that is open to the world, right? So, like, how do we have shalom bayit, a sense of fullness and peace in our own home, but yet still be open to the rest of the world, right? And that's a huge, I think that's also related to what Dee's question is about. How do we keep that porous nature of the sukkah when it can be so painful and seem impossible?
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're out of time, but I really appreciate, Susan, your teaching today and this conversation. Thank you, everybody, for a really rich conversation in the chat. And we can give one more time the link um, to the Dropbox, to the sheet there, perhaps. Now, there we go. And we'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. And thank you, everybody, and wish you a Chag Sameach.
Thank you, Josh.
Okay, take